Imagine you wake up one morning ready for a normal day, only to find your country divided, your freedom taken away, and your every move watched. For millions of Germans living under Soviet occupation after World War II, this was their harsh reality. Welcome to Before Now. In this video, we'll explore the everyday struggles and adaptations of those who lived in the shadow of oppressive Soviet rule. The Union of Soviet Specialist Republics, or USSR, commonly known as the Soviet Union, was a communist state from 1922 to 1991. They were the primary rivals of the United States from the end of World War II until the late 1980s. Although the war's end brought relief to many Germans, it also marked the beginning of a new challenge as Soviet rule took hold. August 1945 was a turning point in Europe. The sounds of war had finally fallen silent. The Third Reich's grand ambitions lay in ruins after the might of the Allied forces. Despite Germany's devastation, its people remained resilient and ready to rebuild. However, they soon found themselves embroiled in a new kind of conflict, a war fought with ideas, ideologies, and economics. With Germany still recovering from the war, the Soviet Union easily seized control of the eastern sector. At the Potsdam Conference, the Allied powers divided Germany into two, leaving 60 million people in eastern Germany under Soviet control. This division created two opposing halves. The western side became a capitalist stronghold, resisting the communist threat, while the eastern side was transformed into a socialist state, praised as a utopia, at least in theory. Though Eastern Germany was presented as a utopian state, Western propaganda often painted it as a dystopian nightmare. In reality, the truth lay somewhere in between these extremes, reflecting a more complex and nuanced situation that defied easy categorization. Under Soviet occupation, East Germany became a puppet state with strict governance. As the Soviets took control, they dismantled the remaining industries and shipped much of it back to the Soviet Union. Thousands of suspected Nazi sympathizers and anti-communists were rounded up and imprisoned in concentration camps. Meanwhile, the Soviets laid the foundation for a new communist regime, meticulously rebuilding the state and erasing traces of the old way of life. In 1946, the occupying powers in Germany forcibly merged the Communist Party and the Social Democratic Republic, creating the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, or SED. This new party was purged of all opposition to Stalinism and became the sole ruling party of the newly established German government. The move led to the creation of a one-party state where opposition was suppressed and dissenters were harshly punished. In October 1949, the Soviets formally transferred political control of their occupied zone to the SED, establishing the so-called German Democratic Republic, or GDR, which was far from democratic. In reality, the GDR, or East Germany, was intended to be an independent nation, but the SED remained heavily controlled by the Soviet Union. From its inception, the GDR and its citizens faced tremendous hardships. Rationing, shortages of work and housing, and reliance on the black market became the norm. Western Germany, particularly the Ruhr Valley, had always been Germany's industrial center. When the GDR lost access to this region, it suffered a severe lack of manufacturing capacity, leading to chronic shortages of essential goods. As a result, the population endured malnutrition and severe poverty. With few goods available to purchase, workers had little motivation, further stagnating the economy. The East German people, worn down by economic hardship, were starkly contrasted with their Western counterparts, who were experiencing economic recovery thanks to the American Marshall Plan. As news of Western prosperity reached the GDR, tens of thousands of desperate citizens fled to the West, worsening the GDR's economic problems. This mass exodus of skilled workers, young people, and intellectuals, known as the brain drain, was a significant setback for the East German economy. The SED attempted to counter this emigration with aggressive propaganda campaigns, labeling those who left as traitors and unpatriotic. In response to the growing crisis, the SED decided that making Walter Ulbricht, the General Secretary of the SED, the face of the regime, would be the best way to stem the flow of citizens fleeing to West Germany. In 1952, Ulbricht determined that East Germany needed to follow the Soviet Union's example and rapidly convert to a communist society. To achieve this, he implemented a 5-year plan that mirrored Stalin's methods, resulting in increased starvation and severe economic decline. Ulbricht's radical policies only exacerbated the suffering of the East German people, demonstrating his commitment to Stalinist ideology and his disregard for his own citizens' well-being. His attempts to collectivize agriculture led to food shortages, and his heavy taxation of private enterprises wiped out the small number of consumer goods that had just started to reappear. The SED attempted to compensate for these shortages by increasing worker quotas, requiring workers to put in 10% more effort while receiving the same pay. This was the final straw for many East Germans, prompting hundreds of thousands to flee to the West. Realizing that Ulbricht's measures were ineffective, the Soviets urged him to reduce the pressure. In the summer of 1953, even after Soviet intervention, a workers' strike broke out in East Berlin. Within days, the strike spread rapidly across the GDR, quickly growing into a protest involving 340,000 people who demanded free elections and other reforms. As the situation escalated, Ulbricht was forced to seek assistance from the Soviets. It was only when Soviet tanks and troops intervened that the riots were finally suppressed. However, the migration continued unabated. By 1960, over 4 million East Germans had fled, accounting for a staggering 1/4 of the country's entire population. Despite the party officials' efforts to fortify the border with West Germany, these measures proved ineffective against those determined to escape. Frustrated by the ongoing exodus, the SED took drastic action in 1961 by constructing the Berlin Wall, a 157-kilometer barrier that effectively sealed East Germany off from the West. The wall made escaping nearly impossible, as illustrated by a story from Wall Jumper, a Berlin story by Peter Schneider, in which a young man built a makeshift catapult to launch himself over the wall. While he managed to cross, he landed on a border guard hut and was immediately apprehended, a far cry from the successful escape he had envisioned. In the aftermath, several others were caught, much to the SED's satisfaction, and over the next 3 decades, only 5,000 people would successfully escape. For those left behind, the 1960s brought slow but steady improvements in living conditions in the GDR. With fewer people, housing and jobs became more accessible, and production of consumer goods and strategic resources increased. By the end of the decade, East Germany had become the wealthiest country in the Eastern Bloc. Despite increased production, shortages in stores persisted due to the government's tight control over production, often resulting in long lines outside shops. Hoarding became commonplace, and those without access to Western currency were subject to the party's erratic economic policies. While life in the GDR improved, underlying discontent remained. In a desperate attempt to maintain control, the East German government relied heavily on their secret police force, known as the Stasi, to suppress dissent. With over 90,000 employees and more than 175,000 informants, the Stasi closely monitored the population, silencing any opposition. However, the Stasi soon realized that their oppressive methods were too crude and shifted to psychological warfare. This approach eventually sparked mass protests and demonstrations, which led to the fall of the Berlin Wall. After the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989, a series of peaceful revolutions spread throughout Eastern Europe, collectively known as the Revolutions of 1989. In quick succession, communist regimes in Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and other nations were toppled as citizens demanded free elections, democracy, and economic reforms. These events, combined with the declining Soviet economy, placed immense pressure on Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to implement reforms. In 1990, East and West Germany were reunited with the approval of citizens on both sides of the former border. However, the division between the two halves did not vanish overnight. Many factories in the East were shut down, leading to widespread unemployment, particularly among men who had previously held stable jobs under the communist regime. Despite Germany's reunification, many former East Germans still feel nostalgia for the GDR, a time when there was a sense of stability and solidarity, even amidst a lack of prosperity. While historians acknowledge the repressive nature of the GDR, some individuals continue to identify with their East German heritage. This raises a thought-provoking question. Is it possible to separate the positive aspects of a country's history from its negative ones, or must they always be considered together? Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Don't forget to leave a comment below. See you next time.